Reaction continues to come in after a bombshell draft is leaked from the U.S. Supreme Court on abortion rights. The opinion showed the conservative-leaning majority bench voted to overturn the 1973 decision Roe v. Wade. CBS 2's Natalie Duttridge has the latest on the investigation into this leak.
Chief Justice John Roberts put out a statement calling the leak of the unfinished decision a betrayal. He says, quote, justices circulate draft opinions internally as a routine, an essential part of the court's confidential, deliberative work. Now, although the document described in yesterday's report is authentic, it does not represent a decision by the court or the final position of any member. Now, if this decision is finalized, it would dismantle 50 years of precedent and pave the way for states to severely limit abortion rights in the U.S.
America doesn't want to overturn Roe v. Wade.
The reversal of Roe v. Wade is good. It will save lives.
People on both sides gathered outside the U.S. Supreme Court after Politico published a leaked draft opinion from the High Court, suggesting the conservative majority is preparing to overturn Roe v. Wade.
We will not go back!
If true, the report says Justice Samuel Alito wrote, Roe was egregiously wrong from the start. It is time to heed the Constitution and return the issue of abortion to the people's elected representatives. The document claims Justices Clarence Thomas, Brett Kavanaugh, Neil Gorsuch, and Amy Coney Barrett voted to support the Alito opinion for a majority of at least 5. It's important to note opinions can change and get rewritten many times before they're final.
If the draft opinion stands, what it means is that women will live in two very different Americas.
The unconfirmed draft not only shocking America, but also the fact an early opinion was leaked at all.
This has never happened before. It's a tremendously big deal for the court. The court takes its secrecy incredibly seriously.
Mitch McConnell said in a statement, the stunning breach was an attack on the independence of the Supreme Court. By every indication, this was yet another escalation in the radical left's ongoing campaign to bully and intimidate federal judges. President Biden said this morning, if the court does overturn Roe, it will fall on our nation's elected officials at all levels of government to protect a woman's right to choose, and it will fall on voters to elect pro-choice officials this November. New York Governor Kathy Hochul said, this is an absolutely disgraceful attack on our fundamental right to choose, and we will fight with everything we've got. Governor Murphy in New Jersey added, a truly dark day in America. The most recent CBS News poll shows 62% of Americans want to keep the law as is, 38% want it overturned.
That was Natalie Duttridge reporting. Now, Chief Justice Roberts has confirmed the authenticity of the draft. He is requesting a marshal do a full investigation into the source of this breach. Here to explain what may come next and how we got here is Hofstra Law School professor James Sample. He teaches constitutional law and is an expert on the U.S. Supreme Court. Welcome, Professor Sample.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you, Dana.
Thank you. Is shock a good word to say? Tell us how you felt, your response when you first heard this news.
It is shocking, and it is shocking in the sense that this leaked and that it is now confirmed to have been at least authentic as a draft. This could portend a seismic shift in the law that is very different from the last 50 years in the United States of America, or it could be a draft, a tale full of sound and fury that signifies very little. As Natalie's piece indicated, votes can change during the deliberative process, and so there is no guarantee that the rights in Roe v. Wade will in fact be overturned at all, or if they are overturned, that they'll be overturned in the manner that Justice Alito's draft opinion does. If, however, the opinion is close to this opinion and the court majority holds something akin to this draft, it is a dark day for choice rights. It is a remarkable political victory for Mitch McConnell and the Republican Party, which has sought for 50 years to reach this stage. And it is a real feather in the cap of President Donald Trump, who had 3 nominees to the Supreme Court, and this is really seeing that day to fruition.
You touched on all of those different issues, stakeholders, and let's talk about the consequences of the timing here. response to the draft, the protesters at the steps of the High Court, does that have an effect? How are their voices heard?
I don't believe that the voices from the public at this stage are likely to have an impact one way or another. But once the decision does come down and is final, whatever that decision may be, then it's clear that the voters in America are really going to see this issue kicked back into their arena. And the legislatures around the country, at the ballot box, and even in congressional and presidential elections, as this is really a truly dramatic change that a lot of people never thought they would see in an America where the vast majority of the voting populace supports abortion rights, even though the Republican Party has essentially coordinated a takeover of the U.S. Supreme Court.
Hearing from Chief Justice John Roberts saying it's a leak, a betrayal, that the leak is a betrayal, an egregious breach of trust. Just trying to think how Politico got this, the source. Could Politico face charges? How could they have gotten this information?
Well, I don't think Politico is going to be facing any charges. I mean, we have freedom of the press. Whoever leaked the document is facing a very serious inquiry. And if that person is actually employed by one of the justices or in the court in some other capacity, they are facing some very, very severe consequences. But the bigger issue beyond the leak itself is that this portends a very different America for women, depending on where those women live. In states that are unlike our tri-state viewing area, you are talking about women who lack the means to travel, not being able to access a right that has been available to them in some respects for the last 50 years. We have a current court majority and a Republican Party that says it's an invasion of your freedom to have to wear a mask during a pandemic to protect your fellow citizens. And yet that same party is willing to force a 14-year-old girl who was the victim of rape or incest to have an abortion against her will.
Talking about the states, Professor, the 13 states, if this decision does become law, there are 13 states. Help us understand this, that this would be enacted immediately in those states?
Right. So there are several states, and 13 may in fact be the number, I don't know it off the top of my head, but that have so-called trigger laws, which are, in essence, they've already passed the law in the legislature and it's been signed into law by their respective governors, where if Roe is overturned, then abortion, they don't have to take an additional step. Abortion is immediately outlawed in those particular jurisdictions.
And go ahead, I'm sorry.
So that's not the case in New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, where the governors and the legislatures have, in fact, expanded beyond the federal minimum of abortion rights. But around the country, there is going to be a vast, vast disparity in terms of what's available to women.
You know, this is complicated, as emotional as it is, and we've touched on the political implications as well. So just help me out here, because some people might not know what the word codify means, for instance, which relates to the tri-state area.
So in the tri-state area, the state constitutions and there are state statutes passed by the legislature that expressly protect the right to abortion. And even if Justice Alito's draft opinion were to become law, the draft that was circulated last night by Politico, if that exact draft were to become Supreme Court precedent in the tri-state area, the state law would protect the woman's right to choose. But in southern states and in many other states around the country, that would not be the case.
So is it fair to say then women in these states can feel more confident that abortion could remain legal?
Certainly they can. Certainly women in the tri-state area can feel confident that at least in the near future, barring federal legislation, which might be the next step if we were to get a Republican Congress and a Republican president who wanted to federally outlaw abortion pursuant to this decision. Barring that kind of a development, women in the tri-state will still have the opportunity to access their right to choose with their doctor. It's women around the country who will not have that right. And in fact, there's a lot of talk that there will be organizations and individuals who will support women from jurisdictions where abortion is not accessible to come to jurisdictions where it is accessible. The legal wrinkles there are as yet untested, however.
And Governor Hochul has said that women from other states will be welcome to New York with open arms if they seek an abortion here. Could the woman face prosecution if she comes to? You started to touch on that. If she comes to a state where it is, it's illegal in her home state, but she chooses another state where she can have an abortion legally.
We don't have a clear answer to that question, but as to whether the prosecution would be upheld. But it's clear that a woman in those circumstances coming from certain states, Oklahoma, Mississippi, Texas, a number of states have already taken steps saying that if one of their citizens goes to another state, like New York and Governor Hochul's invitation, and has an abortion in that state, they could in fact face prosecution in their home state. Now, whether or not that will be upheld as constitutional is a really, really difficult and untested question that may speak to the litigation forefront that is ahead of us now in this very, very new and uncharted territory.
And certainly with the primary, for instance, in Ohio, we have, you know, we're about to get into all of these different primaries for the state, for Congress, as well as some gubernatorial races. So now Democrats have the majority. You touched on this earlier about the political implications, and were you starting to also get to the filibuster? If the Republicans were to have control, if this all happens as could possibly be expected?
Absolutely, and a great question, Dana. Imagine for a moment a scenario where it's 2025 after the 2024 presidential election, and both houses of Congress are controlled by the Republican Party, and there's a Republican in the White House. Even if the Senate is just barely Republican, 51-49, or even 50-50 with the vice president breaking a tie. If the Republican Party chose to set aside the filibuster in that circumstance and say abortion is not subject to the filibuster, you could have a scenario where at the federal level, abortion rights could be yet further limited, even beyond what appear to be the limitations that are coming down the pike with this decision, if in fact the decision is what it appears likely to be.
Two more questions I have for you. So with Democrat president, Congress, what can they do if the president, what can he do? What can Congress do, if anything, right now?
In the short term, there's not a whole lot. In the long term, President Biden may have the opportunity to appoint one or more Supreme Court justices beyond Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, who was recently confirmed to take the seat vacated by Justice Breyer, or that will be vacated by Justice Breyer at the end of this term. It's not clear, though, that President Biden will have that opportunity. And at the federal level in Congress, in the Senate and in the House, the effort is going to be first on playing defense and ensuring no further harm for the Democrats or for the women's right to choose. The problem is that the Democrats have already shown that they do not have the votes to do away with the filibuster unless Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, for example, decided suddenly that they were willing to do away with the filibuster, which they've shown no inclination to do. Then the Democratic majority is really a majority in the Senate that can be thwarted by the minority party currently, that is the Republicans. And so passing legislation at the federal level is not likely to be available to the Democrats in the near term. And longer term, this speaks to the importance of Supreme Court nominations and appointments. And really, if you go back to 2016, when Mitch McConnell refused to even give a hearing to outgoing Democratic President Barack Obama's nominee, Merrick Garland, for the Supreme Court, that sequence of events is yielding the dividends of Mitch McConnell's wildest dreams right now.
Before we go, I want to go back to the first thing we talked about, a draft leaked and the process of, I mean, I know they go on a summer session, so we're talking about several weeks. Although it's a 5-4, could the votes change? Could every day of negotiations counts, correct?
Absolutely, and there are a zillion different conspiracy theories that are based at this point on little more than speculation. But one of the theories that is out there is that if this leak actually came from a justice or from the camp of a justice who is in the majority in the draft, they may be trying to shore up a wobbly justice who's considering perhaps joining a narrower opinion with Chief Justice John Roberts, who is by no means a moderate, except on this court, where Chief Justice Roberts really is a moderate relative to the justices who are to his right. So there is certainly the possibility that one of the justices in that 5-member majority is being wooed and could be peeled off. And if peeled off, then you only have 4 votes for this draft opinion or something like it, in which case Roe survives, or survives a little bit in a more narrowly defined way, perhaps. That's a possibility for sure.
Thank you for the perspective and just helping us all, people of both opinions, understand this better. I do appreciate it. Hofstra University Law Professor Jim Sample, thank you so much.
Thank you, Dana. Have a great day.
And you too. If you'd like more information about the Supreme Court's draft opinion on Roe v. Wade, the opinion that was leaked, go to our website, cbsnewyork.com.